On a freezing Christmas Eve, a single father sees a little girl digging through trash for food. But when he steps closer, he realizes the truth. This child isn't just a stranger. She's the missing piece of his past, carrying a secret that will shatter his world and change Christmas forever. This is not just a story, it's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada, the US, Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. The city glistened under a blanket of fresh snow, its streets glowing with golden lights, carolers filling the crisp air with melodies, and shop windows bursting with colors of joy. Christmas Eve had arrived, wrapping the world in warmth, laughter, and the promise of togetherness. Yet for some, the night carried only silence, emptiness, and shadows of longing. Ethan Miller, a single father in his early 40s, pressed his face against the frosted windowpane of his modest apartment. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine from the small tree his 8-year-old son Noah had decorated with paper stars and handmade ornaments. Gifts, few but precious, sat under it, wrapped in crinkled red paper. Ethan's heart was heavy. Christmas was supposed to be magical, but since his wife's passing 3 years ago, every holiday carried an ache too deep to name. Outside, snowflakes danced under the dim glow of a lamppost. That was when Ethan saw her. A tiny figure, no more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing a tattered coat far too thin for the biting cold, shuffled near the overflowing trash bins at the corner of the street. Her fingers, red and raw from frost, dug through discarded boxes and wrinkled wrapping paper, as if searching for something lost or hidden. Her face, pale and streaked with grime, turned upward once in a while, scanning the windows that shimmered with warmth she clearly didn't have. Ethan's heart clenched. Who was she? Why was a child out in the snow on Christmas Eve, searching through trash like a desperate soul? He told himself it wasn't his concern. That life was already heavy enough with his own struggles. But when the girl pulled out a broken doll, cradled it against her chest as though it were gold, and smiled the saddest smile Ethan had ever seen, something in him shifted. That night, fate began to stir. A single father, grieving yet holding on to hope for his son's happiness, would cross paths with a little girl whose secret was buried deep in the silence of winter. And the truth waiting to be revealed would leave Ethan shaken to his core, forever changing the meaning of Christmas. For him, his son, and the girl no one seemed to claim. The clock ticked softly in the Miller household, its steady rhythm competing with the faint hum of Christmas carols drifting from a neighbor's radio upstairs. Ethan sat slouched in his armchair, a mug of lukewarm cocoa untouched beside him. His son, Noah, had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching the stuffed bear his late mother had given him years ago. The boy's breathing was soft, his face peaceful in a way that stabbed Ethan's heart with equal parts love and sorrow. He should have been happy, grateful even. They had a roof over their heads, food for tomorrow's dinner, and the small tree Noah had begged to set up weeks ago. But something about Christmas always carved open Ethan's loneliness like a fresh wound. He rubbed his temples and sighed, thinking of the days when laughter filled the air and his wife, Grace, would sing carols off key just to make Noah giggle. Those memories now felt like ghosts lingering in every twinkle of the lights. Then he saw her again. Through the frosted glass of his window, Ethan's eyes caught the faint figure outside. The girl, frail, shivering, was still by the trash bins. Her movements were deliberate, careful, as though she wasn't scavenging for food but searching for something else, something only she could recognize. She pulled out scraps, lifted boxes, and peered into torn bags, her small shoulders trembling under the weight of the cold night. Ethan stood, his pulse quickening. For a long moment he hesitated, his mind racing with questions. Why was she alone? Where were her parents? Should he step outside? Logic told him to stay put, to call someone if needed, but another voice, the quieter, deeper one that often whispered when he looked at Noah, urged him to act. He pulled on his coat, the zipper snagging halfway as if reminding him of his reluctance. Opening the door, he felt the sharp bite of winter slap against his face. His boots crunched over the thin layer of snow as he stepped toward the corner. Hey, he called gently, not wanting to scare her. The girl froze, her back stiffening. Slowly, she turned, revealing a face both delicate and dirt-streaked. Her eyes, large and shimmering, held a mix of fear and defiance. Ethan was struck by how much older they looked than the rest of her. Eyes that had seen far too much for a child's age. What are you doing out here? Ethan asked softly, keeping his distance. She clutched the broken doll tighter, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant laughter of families inside warm homes. Then, with a voice barely louder than the falling snow, she whispered, "I'm looking for her." Ethan's brows furrowed. "For who?" The girl blinked, her lashes heavy with frost. She looked down at the doll and back up at him. "My mommy," she said. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The words pierced him like shards of ice, and in that instant, he knew the night would not let him simply walk away. The snow fell heavier now, drifting in sheets that blurred the quiet street. Ethan stood frozen, his breath misting in the cold air, the little girl's words echoing in his head. "I'm looking for my mommy." She couldn't have been older than 8, yet the way she clutched that broken doll made her look even younger. Fragile, breakable. Ethan swallowed hard. He should call the police, or at least ask her where she lived. But looking at her trembling form, the thought of turning away felt impossible. "What's your name?" he asked gently, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. The girl hesitated, her gaze darting between him and the apartment building behind him, as if weighing whether he could be trusted. Finally, in a voice as soft as the snowflakes landing on her hair, she said, "Lila. Lila." Ethan repeated, tasting the name like it was something precious. "It's late, and it's freezing out here. Where's your home?" Her small chin lifted stubbornly. "I don't have one." The word sent a shiver down Ethan's spine deeper than the winter wind. He glanced at her thin coat, the threadbare gloves with holes at the fingertips, the worn boots barely tied. She hadn't wandered from a cozy house down the street. This child was living in the cold. Ethan's instinct screamed to scoop her up and carry her inside, but another voice whispered doubt. He was already stretched thin, a single father trying to hold life together for Noah. Could he really involve himself in someone else's struggle? Someone who carried secrets he didn't understand? Still, he couldn't ignore her. "Do you have family? Anyone I can call?" he asked. Lila hugged the doll tighter, shaking her head. "She said she'd come back for me." "But she hasn't." "Not yet." "Your mom," Ethan pressed. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears and she nodded. That was all she gave. Ethan's chest tightened. Something inside him cracked wide open, an ache he hadn't let himself feel since Grace's death. He knew too well what it meant to wait for someone who would never come back. He took a careful breath. "Lila, would you like to come inside for a while? Just to warm up. You don't have to stay. But it's too cold for you out here." Her body stiffened, fear flashing in her eyes. "I'm not supposed to go with strangers." Ethan almost smiled at the irony. She was right, and the fact that she remembered her mother's warning made his heart twist. "You're smart to say that," he replied. "But I'm not a stranger, not really. My name's Ethan and my son, Noah, is inside. He's about your age. You can meet him if you like." Lila's eyes flickered with something, curiosity perhaps, or hunger for the warmth of another child's company. Her tiny hands rubbed the doll's faded dress, as if seeking courage. Finally, she whispered, "Just for a little while." Ethan nodded and stood, extending his hand. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then, slowly, her icy fingers slipped into his. Together, they walked toward the apartment building. Behind them, the snow erased their footprints, as if trying to bury the night's secret. But as Ethan pushed open the door and led her inside, he couldn't shake one thought. What kind of truth was this girl carrying with her? And why did fate place her in his path tonight? Warmth greeted them as Ethan shut the apartment door behind them. The smell of cinnamon and pine drifted through the air, wrapping around the small living room like an embrace. The glow from the Christmas tree lights flickered against the walls, soft and golden. Lila's wide eyes darted to the decorated branches, her lips parting slightly in awe. It was nothing extravagant, just a small tree, leaning a little to one side, its ornaments mostly paper stars Noah had made at school. But to Lila, who had been standing in the cold moments earlier, it looked like magic. Noah stirred on the couch, blinking sleepily before sitting upright, his messy hair stuck up in every direction. When his gaze landed on Lila, confusion filled his eyes. "Dad, who's that?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Ethan hesitated. How could he explain this? "This is Lila," he said softly. "She was outside, and I thought she could use a little warmth." Noah tilted his head, curiosity overtaking his grogginess. "Hi, Lila," he said, his voice carrying a child's natural friendliness. "Do you want some cocoa? Dad made extra." For the first time, Lila's face softened. She glanced up at Ethan, as if seeking permission. He gave a small nod. "That sounds nice, doesn't it?" Within minutes, Noah was proudly handing her a chip mug filled with steaming cocoa. Lila cradled it in her hands, closing her eyes as the heat seeped into her frozen fingers. She took a careful sip, and for a moment, Ethan swore he saw something in her expression, relief, maybe even gratitude, that pierced his chest. "You can sit by the tree," Noah offered, patting the rug beside him. "Want to see the ornament I made?" "It's a rocket ship." Lila hesitated, then sat cross-legged near the tree. Noah eagerly showed her the crooked paper rocket dangling from a branch, and to Ethan's surprise, Lila giggled. Soft, fleeting sound as if she wasn't used to laughter but couldn't help it. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in years, his living room didn't feel heavy with grief. Two children sat beneath the tree, sharing cocoa and stories as though the night were just another Christmas Eve. But when Noah asked the question every child asks another, the fragile peace shifted. "So, where's your family? Lila?" The mug in Lila's hands trembled slightly. She set it down on the rug and hugged the broken doll to her chest. Her voice was small but steady. "I don't have one, not anymore." The words hung in the room like a shadow. Noah glanced at his father, confusion flickering across his face. Ethan's heart clenched. He wanted to press, to demand answers, but the look in Lila's eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't just sadness, it was fear. Before he could speak, Lila whispered something else, almost to herself, but just loud enough for Ethan to hear. "They're still looking for me." Ethan's stomach dropped. His mind spun. Who's looking for her, and why? The words clung to the air like frost. "They're still looking for me." Ethan's chest tightened, and for a long moment the room seemed too small, too silent. He studied Lila, searching her young face for answers she clearly wasn't ready to give. Her gaze darted toward the window, where snowflakes pressed against the glass like pale ghosts. She pulled the doll closer, as if it were her shield. "Lila?" Ethan said carefully, his voice as gentle as he could make it. "Who's looking for you?" She shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. Fear flickered across her expression before she forced it down, hiding it behind a mask far too practiced for a child her age. Noah frowned, glancing between them. "Dead? Is she in trouble?" Ethan placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. "No, why don't you grab some cookies from the kitchen? The ones you and I baked yesterday." The Noah hesitated, reluctant to leave but obeyed. Once his footsteps faded, Ethan crouched beside Lila, lowering his voice. "You're safe here. No one can hurt you. But if someone is searching for you, I need to know who they are. Can you tell me?" Her fingers picked at the doll's frayed hem. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then she whispered, "They're bad people." A chill prickled down Ethan's spine. "Bad people? What do you mean?" A tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. "They hurt my mommy. She told me to run and hide. She said she'd find me, but she never did." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Ethan. Images filled his mind. This little girl, lost in the freezing streets, waiting for a mother who might never return. The weight of it pressed hard against his chest, awakening a protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. Before he could speak, Noah returned, proudly carrying a plate of slightly overcooked cookies. He plopped down beside Lila and offered her one. She sniffled, quickly wiping her eyes before taking the treat with a timid smile. Ethan forced himself to breathe. He couldn't overwhelm her with questions now, not when she was trembling on the edge of trust. But his thoughts churned. Who were these people she feared? And why was a child left alone on Christmas Eve with only a broken doll to cling to? As the children nibbled cookies beneath the glow of the tree, Ethan slipped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad, torn between calling the police and the fear of betraying the fragile trust Lila had just given him. What if the system failed her? What if she disappeared into it, lost and forgotten? A soft giggle drifted from the living room. Noah showing Lila how he could make the stuffed bear dance. Ethan's heart squeezed. She didn't look like a stranger anymore. She looked like a child who desperately needed a home. But as he slipped his phone back into his pocket, Ethan caught sight of something that froze him in place. On Lila's coat pocket, barely visible beneath the worn fabric, was a small embroidered tag, faded letters spelling out the name of a shelter across town. A shelter he knew had been shut down months ago, after a police raid. Ethan's blood ran cold. Ethan's fingers brushed the frayed tag on Lila's coat, the faded stitching barely legible in the dim light. But he knew the name instantly. Havenbrook Shelter. He remembered seeing it splashed across the news just months ago. The place had been exposed as a front for something darker. Reports had hinted at illegal activities, exploitation, neglect, children vanishing without explanation. The city had shut it down, but rumors claimed not everyone involved had been caught. And now, here was a child, sitting on his living room rug, wrapped in the warmth of Christmas lights, wearing a coat from that very shelter. His pulse quickened. He leaned against the hallway wall, trying to quiet the storm rising in his chest. What had this girl escaped from? And what if the people still running the shadows of Havenbrook were the very ones, looking for her? "Dad?" Noah's voice startled him. Ethan quickly composed himself and stepped back into the living room. Noah grinned, cookie crumbs smeared on his chin. "Lila says she likes the tree. Can she help me put the star on top?" Ethan's gaze softened despite the storm in his mind. Lila stood near the tree, small and hesitant, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the star Noah held out to her. For a moment, she looked less like a child hunted by shadows and more like a little girl longing to belong. "Of course," Ethan said, his voice thick. Noah dragged a chair over, insisting Lila stand on it while he steadied her. She reached up, trembling slightly, and placed the paper star crookedly at the top. When she climbed down, both children laughed at how lopsided it was. Ethan swallowed, the ache rising in his throat. She deserves this, he thought. She deserves more than the cold and fear she's known. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, reality gnawed at him. He couldn't just ignore the truth. Once Noah had gone to bed, Ethan sat Lila down gently on the couch. The glow of the tree bathed her small face in golden shadow. "Lila," he said carefully, "that coat you're wearing, it has a name on it. Havenbrook. Do you remember that place?" Her eyes widened, panic flaring instantly. She shook her head too quickly, hugging her doll so tightly it seemed strained. "Sweetheart, I'm not angry," Ethan continued softly. "I just need to understand. Did you live there?" A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She buried her face against the doll. Her muffled words were almost lost, but Ethan caught them. "They took me there after Mommy disappeared. She promised she'd come back, but she never did." Ethan's throat closed. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to shield her from every nightmare she had endured. But before he could, she lifted her face, eyes shining with both fear and defiance. "They said if I talked about what happened inside, they'd find me. And they'd make me disappear too." The words struck like a hammer. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the truth. This wasn't just a lost child. Lila carried secrets dangerous enough to keep powerful people chasing her. And now she was in his home. Ethan sat in silence, his thoughts a storm he could hardly contain. Lila's words echoed in his ears, "They'd make me disappear too." He stared at her small frame curled into the couch, her doll pressed so tightly against her chest it seemed like her only anchor to the world. Fear twisted inside him. He had spent 3 years learning how to live without grace, piecing together a fragile routine for Noah, holding their little world together with tape and hope. But now, fate had placed this girl at his doorstep, a child who carried with her not only grief but danger that could easily spill into his and Noah's lives. He stood abruptly, pacing the room. The old wooden floor creaked beneath his boots, each step louder than his racing thoughts. "I should call the police," he told himself. That was the logical choice. Let the authorities handle it. But then he remembered the headlines, the failures, the corruption, the children who slipped through the cracks and never resurfaced. What if Lila vanished again, lost in a system that didn't care enough to protect her? "Dad?" Ethan turned. Noah stood at the hallway in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you still up?" "It's Christmas tomorrow." He paused, looking at Lila, who quickly wiped her face with her sleeve. "Did something happen?" Ethan forced a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about, buddy. Go back to bed." Noah frowned but nodded, disappearing into his room. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. He sat beside Lila, careful not to frighten her. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "No one will hurt you tonight. I promise." Her wide eyes searched his face as though testing his words for truth. Then, slowly, she whispered, "They'll find me, you know. They always do." The words chilled him. "Who, Lila?" Her lips trembled. "The men from the shelter. They wore badges sometimes, but not like police. Different ones. They said Mommy owed them, and when she couldn't they took me instead." Ethan's fists clenched. He had to fight the urge to curse out loud. The thought of men using children as pawns in some vile scheme ignited a rage deep inside him. "You're not going back to them," he said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. The room fell quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock edging toward midnight. Outside, snow blanketed the city in silence, but Ethan's mind was anything but quiet. Protecting Lila meant stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. Yet letting her go meant betraying the fragile trust she had placed in him tonight. As Lila's eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling her into sleep, Ethan covered her with a blanket. She looked so small, so breakable. A child who should have been dreaming of gifts under the tree, not haunted by men in the dark. Then came the knock, sharp, heavy, echoing through the apartment like a warning. Ethan froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. No one visited at this hour. No one, unless they were already looking. The knock reverberated through the small apartment again, louder this time, rattling the thin door. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. His first instinct was to glance at Lila, her tiny form curled on the couch under the blanket, her chest rising and falling in fragile sleep. She didn't stir. The knock came once more. Ethan crept toward the door, every muscle tense, and peered through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, his shoulders dusted with snow, a dark coat draped heavily over his frame. His face was half hidden beneath the brim of a hat, but something about the rigid stance set alarms ringing in Ethan's mind. He didn't open the door. Instead, he called through it, voice low but firm. "Who is it?" A pause. Then a deep voice answered, "Sorry to bother you, sir. City Services. We're doing a welfare check. Some reports about a child wandering the neighborhood." Ethan's blood turned to ice. His hand tightened on the doorknob. City services. At midnight. He knew enough to recognize the holes in that story. His gut told him everything he needed. This man wasn't here to help. Must have the wrong building, Ethan said carefully, trying to sound casual. No child here. Silence on the other side. Then the man replied, voice slightly sharper, funny. Because we have reason to believe otherwise. Ethan's stomach dropped. He stepped back, instinct screaming at him. They already knew. Behind him, a small voice broke the tension. Ooze at the door. Leela was awake, her doll clutched tight against her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips quickly. Shh, he whispered. The man outside knocked again, harder this time. Sir, it's important you let us in, for the child's safety. The words dripped with false concern, and Ethan's chest burned with anger. Whoever these people were, they weren't here to keep her safe. They were here to take her. He glanced at Noah's bedroom door down the hall. His son was asleep, unaware of the storm at their doorstep. Ethan felt torn in two, between shielding Noah from danger and protecting the terrified girl fate had placed in his care. For a long moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Ethan stepped back toward Leela and knelt in front of her. Listen to me, he whispered urgently. You stay quiet, no matter what. Do you understand? She nodded, her little body trembling. Ethan rose and grabbed the nearest thing he could, a heavy flashlight from the counter. His reflection in the darkened window looked nothing like the man he used to be. He looked like a father ready to fight for what mattered. The knocking stopped. Silence pressed against the door like a predator waiting. Then the man's voice came again, lower, colder. You can't hide her forever. Ethan's breath caught. His fingers tightened around the flashlight, his heart slamming against his ribs. Whoever this man was, he knew about Leela, and that meant time was running out. Ethan stood frozen, his breath shallow as the man's chilling words echoed in the hall. You can't hide her forever. Every instinct screamed to act. He didn't know how many people were outside or how long they'd wait, but one thing was clear. Staying put was no longer an option. He turned to Leela, who sat huddled on the couch, eyes wide, clutching the doll like it was life itself. She looked at him as though he were the last line between her and the monsters in her nightmares. That look cut through every fear Ethan had. He couldn't let her down. Quietly, he walked down the hall and pushed open Noah's door. The boy stirred, rubbing his eyes. Dead. What's happening? Ethan crouched beside him, forcing his voice to stay calm. Noah, buddy, I need you to listen. We're gonna take a little trip. Right now. 8 night. But it's Christmas. Noah's sleepy confusion broke Ethan's heart. He smoothed his son's hair back, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes, he whispered, Christmas isn't about staying home. Sometimes it's about protecting the people who need us most. Noah blinked, his gaze flicking toward the living room where Leela sat. He nodded slowly, sensing more than Ethan wanted him to. Within minutes, Ethan had grabbed essentials, a bag with blankets, bottled water, some food, and his wallet. His hands trembled as he worked, knowing every second wasted was a second closer to danger. He glanced at the window. The snow outside glowed faintly beneath the street lamps. If they left through the back stairwell, maybe, just maybe, they could slip away unnoticed. Dad, Noah whispered, pulling on his sleeve. What about the man at the door? Ethan's jaw tightened. We're not opening it. We'll go out the other way. Quiet as mice, he led Noah and Leela down the hall. Leela's small hand clung to his coat, her doll pressed tightly against her chest. She was trembling so badly he could feel it through the fabric. At the back exit, Ethan paused, ear pressed to the cold metal door. Silence. Only the muffled hush of snow falling. He pushed it open a crack, letting in the biting wind, and scanned the alley. Empty. Relief swept through him like a tide. Stay close, he whispered. The three of them stepped into the snow, their breaths forming pale clouds in the dark. The crunch of their boots sounded deafening in the still night. Every shadow felt alive, every corner a threat. Ethan's heart pounded with each step as they made their way toward his old truck parked 2 streets away. Leela stumbled once, and Ethan scooped her up without hesitation, her tiny frame light in his arms. She buried her face against his shoulder, whispering, They'll come. They always come. Ethan tightened his hold. Not while I'm here, he said fiercely. They reached the truck, snow clinging to their coats. Ethan opened the door, ushered Noah inside, and gently placed Leela on the seat beside him. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys. Then, just as the engine roared to life, a pair of headlights flared in the rearview mirror. Blinding, too close, too deliberate. Someone had found them. The night grew still after the storm of tears that had swept through Daniel's home. Little Emma, wrapped in a blanket too big for her small frame, sat curled up on the couch with a steaming mug of cocoa in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes had softened. For the first time since he'd met her, Daniel noticed something in her gaze that wasn't fear or distrust. Something fragile, like a flickering candle hope. Daniel had spent the last hour quietly moving around the kitchen, preparing a late dinner neither of them had touched. His mind was still reeling. Emma was his daughter. The word felt foreign and yet familiar, heavy with both guilt and wonder. Finally, he sat down beside her, lowering his voice as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile trust between them. "Emma," he began, I don't know how to undo the past. I didn't know. If I had, I promise you, I would have been there." Emma's small shoulders tensed, and her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Mom didn't tell you because she said you already had a family. She didn't want to ruin it." The words pierced Daniel like shards of glass. Memories of his late wife, Marissa, and the years they had shared came flooding back. Had his love for one woman blinded him to the truth of another life he had unknowingly created? Emma set her cocoa down and reached into her little satchel, the same one she had been clutching since the night he first saw her by the dumpsters. She pulled out a small, weathered music box. Its paint was chipped, and the wind-up key was nearly rusted. She turned it slowly and a soft, fragile tune filled the room. "This was my mom's," she said quietly. "She told me when I was sad, I should play it because it reminded her of you." Daniel's heart stopped. The melody was unmistakable. It was the same lullaby he had written on the piano decades ago, a tune he had only ever shared with one person, Clara. His breath caught. Where did she get this? Emma hesitated, then carefully lifted the lining inside the music box. Folded tightly and yellowed with age was a piece of paper. She handed it to him with trembling hands. Daniel unfolded it, his pulse quickening with each word that came into focus. It was a letter, written in Clara's handwriting. The ink was faded, the paper fragile, but the words were clear enough to burn themselves into his soul. "Daniel, if you are ever reading this, it means I never found the courage to tell you face to face. Emma is yours. She deserves a father who will love her. I only ask that you keep this secret until you are ready to accept her. Not out of obligation, but out of love. If you cannot, then at least let her know one day that she was wanted." Daniel's vision blurred as his eyes filled with tears. His hands shook, and the paper crinkled between his fingers. His heart was breaking all over again. Grief for Clara, for the years lost, for the childhood Emma had endured alone. Emma's small voice interrupted his storm of thoughts. Do you want me? Or am I just a mistake?" Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her. In her trembling expression, he saw not only Clara's eyes but his own fears reflected back at him. He leaned forward, pulling her into a tight embrace, his tears soaking her hair. "Emma," he whispered fiercely, "you are not a mistake. You are the greatest gift I never knew I had." But even as the words left his lips, a gnawing question lingered in the back of his mind. The letter had hinted at something more. Why had Clara chosen to hide Emma all these years? Why had she written? If you cannot, then at least let her know she was wanted. What truth had Clara carried to her grave that he had yet to uncover? And as Daniel held his daughter close, the faintest shadow of fear crept into his heart. Was there something darker about Emma's past that even Clara hadn't told him? The answer lay hidden in Clara's past, and Daniel knew he had to uncover it. Christmas morning dawned quietly, the first rays of sunlight spilling across the frosted windows of Daniel's home. The living room was bathed in a golden glow, the tree standing proudly with twinkling lights still flickering from the night before. Wrapping paper lay scattered across the floor from the presents they had exchanged. Some toys Daniel had bought for Emily, and a warm coat that finally fit her small frame. But the true gift wasn't in the boxes. It was in the warmth that had filled the house, the laughter that had replaced silence, and the bond that had taken root between them. Emily awoke slowly, her tiny feet padding across the wooden floor as she rubbed her eyes. Daniel watched her from the kitchen doorway, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. There was something surreal about the sight. This fragile little girl who, just a day ago, had been searching for scraps in the cold, now standing in his home like she belonged there. "Good morning," Daniel said softly. She smiled sleepily. "Good morning, Dad." The word slipped out naturally and Daniel froze. His chest tightened, his throat thickened, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. She had never called him that before. He swallowed hard and placed the mug down before kneeling in front of her. "Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you mean that?" Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but then she nodded. You feel like my dad. Nobody ever looked at me like you do. Nobody ever cared." Daniel's eyes stung as tears blurred his vision. He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly, whispering, "You're not alone anymore. I promise you, from this day on, you'll always have me." The weight of those words sank deep into both of them. For Emily, it was the first time in her short life that she felt she belonged. For Daniel, it was the healing he never thought he would find after losing Sarah. Later that afternoon, they stood outside the orphanage to meet with the director and begin the paperwork for adoption. Emily clung to his coat, fearful that something might take him away. But when the director looked at Daniel, then at Emily, she smiled warmly. "Sometimes," she said, The right families find each other in the most unexpected ways. It seems Christmas brought you both a miracle. Emily's eyes glistened with hope. Daniel squeezed her hand and nodded firmly. She's my daughter now, he said with conviction. Not by chance, not by accident, but because love chose us both. That night, as snowflakes danced outside and the world prepared to step into a new year, Daniel tucked Emily into bed. She held the stuffed teddy bear he had given her close to her chest, her face peaceful for the first time in years. Daddy, she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. Yes, sweetheart, thank you for finding me? Daniel brushed her hair gently, his heart swelling. No, Emily, he murmured. Thank you for saving me. As he turned off the light, the house no longer felt empty. For the first time since Sarah's passing, Daniel knew life wasn't about what he had lost. It was about what he had found. And on that Christmas, a single dad and a little girl searching through trash discovered the most precious gift of all a family.
On a cold Christmas Eve, a struggling single father finds a little girl searching for food in the snow, not knowing she is his own daughter. What begins as a night of sorrow turns into a revelation of love, pain, and forgiveness. In the end, two broken hearts and one innocent child unite, proving that even in the darkest winter, family can bring the light of hope.